So with that, I'll hand over to you, Mark, and take the reins from here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Marsh, again. So look, the presentation today is quite timely, as we're approaching the new financial year. For those organisations that are looking at finalising their strategy, this webinar hopefully can provide some insight. And for those organisations that already have a strategy, we'll talk a little bit more around deployment, and hopefully there's a few tips and tricks in there for you as well. So just a little bit about us, as it relates to the webinar today, we help organisations and boards both develop and deploy strategy. And we're working with a couple of organisations at the moment. Was approached by a health and safety head, had been in the organisation a couple of years and just wanted a fresh set of eyes around their strategy. So we'll share some of those insights today and learning. And it's probably not... It's a great opportunity for us to also let everyone know that we do have a new team member announced this week, Rebecca Crompton. I've known Rebecca for a couple of years. She's a great character, and I really look forward to her bringing in a whole bunch of new energy to our team and to our clients as well. So before we sort of get into it, Sarah, I've got a poll first up. So for everyone on the line, I'm really keen to understand, how often does your organisation actively involve operations to review health and safety strategic objectives? So typically organisations have got some sort of strategy or plan, and part of that plan often is a set of objectives of what they're trying to achieve to improve health and safety. So keen to understand how often you actively engage your operations in the review of those objectives. So Sarah, I'll lead up to you to let us know when people have completed their response, and we can sort of share the results when they're ready.
Okay, just about everyone. Just wait a couple more seconds. All right.
Probably worth noting there's no one right or wrong answer. We will share what a lot of leading organisations are doing in this space. So when you're ready, Sarah, we'll keen to get the results. Okay, so what we've got here is just over half of the respondents are saying annually, and another 30% are either rarely or twice a year, and about 10% or just over every quarter. So we'll share with everyone what leading best practice is. We'll talk a little bit about the importance of reviewing objectives every quarter and how that might tie into your planning cycle. But this does help me, I guess, understand the nature of what organisations are doing at the moment. And we've got about 10% or just over organisations reviewing their objectives with operations on a quarterly basis, which, to be honest, is pretty low. But we can sort of walk through different options as we go through today. So just a quick overview of what we'll cover. We'll cover the why. We'll walk through, what we're talking about today, a few myths, and we'll delve relatively deep on what OKRs and KPIs are and how that might help your organisations. So we've got here a dog chasing its tail, and I guess why having a really strong set of strategic objectives and targets are really important is that you might have some KPIs that seemingly are really well. You might have a strategy that you're implementing really well, but if that strategy is not effective or the KPIs aren't effective, it's really a missed opportunity for growth and improvement. So best case, it's a missed opportunity. Worst case, you're going to plateau or even go backwards if you're not setting really clear objectives, targets in a way that's going to be supporting your organisation. So today, we'll go through some of those concepts in a little bit more detail. So in terms of just setting the scene and the scope, it is a pretty broad subject, so we've tried to limit the scope a little bit. You can see on the screen here a simple diagram that's really differentiating between, on the left-hand side, proactive metrics or reactive metrics and proactive metrics, both internally and externally. So we won't be covering external drivers. We won't be reporting regulatory compliance requirements. We won't be covering off ESG or sustainability reporting and all those things. We're purely going to be focusing on what are some of those internal metrics that help drive performance, health and safety performance in your organisation, with the understanding that often with a balanced scorecard, there is a mixture of both reactive and proactive metrics. More mature organisations tend to focus on the proactive side a little bit more, and less mature organisations, which is fine, tend to focus more on compliance related or reactive and lag indicators. So just to dispel a few myths up front, the Heinrich model, which has been around for many, many, many years, really talks in a linear fashion around if you set targets and drive a certain number of acts, behaviours, reporting around certain things like hazards and near misses, in principle, you're going to reduce injuries and therefore improve health and safety performance. Now, there's lots of literature out there that dispels that as being not necessarily correct. And just because you're reporting more hazards or near misses, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to improve performance. Notwithstanding that, the practice around reporting hazards and near misses obviously is a good one. But what we'll work through today is, what are some of those things that you can do around driving the right strategic direction and approach, as opposed to getting too focused on numbers and KPIs and just getting that balance right. It's fair to say too, there's lots of noise around reporting around lag indicators, lost time injuries, frequency rates. More recently, the CSR, the Construction Safety Research Alliance out of Canada, published some information around the invalidity of TRIFR, total recordable injury frequency rate. So we'll talk a little bit about where frequency rates sit into the mix of a balanced scorecard, and where it might be relevant, and hopefully provide some examples that go beyond lag and lost time injury reporting metrics into something that might be a little bit more meaningful. So OKR versus KPI. So this term has been around for a long time. It's not new. I guess what I'm trying to do today is take a concept that's used in the business fraternity and try and give it a bit of a health and safety flavour in terms of how it might help health and safety performance. So OKR, objective and key results, really is around setting a bit of direction around what you want to achieve and where you're going. So where do you want to play? And the KPIs are really just indicators of, is it working? So if you use the analogy of driving a car, there's going to be a destination or the journey, where you're going, what you want to achieve, the speedo, the tire pressure, the temperature, the oil gauge, they're all just indicators to help you get there. Okay, so if you're getting too focused on the KPIs, so using the safety example of lost time injuries or lag indicators, sometimes you're going to lose focus on the strategy and where you want to go. So clearly some of these indicators around driving a car or safety performance are going to be important and help inform whether things are going well or whether you need to tweak your approach. But if there's a take-home message today, is try and get the balance right between focusing on the indicators and the destination. And if you're getting too focused on the indicators, you're going to lose track of where you're going and your destination. And the destination typically is set through some sort of strategy development and the deployment. The ISO standards talk a lot about setting objectives and targets. What we'll do today is provide a bit of a framework around how you can develop and deploy objectives and targets using the OKR and KPI model. So there is a chat in the chat function there. What have we got here, Sarah? Is there anything relevant for us to go through? We've just got Robert saying if you want to add any questions, just add it to the Q&A panel. So that's good to know. So yeah, feel free to jump on the Q&A panel, throw lots of questions and answers. Happy to pause and answer those as we go through, and or there'll be some question time at the end as well. So what's the difference between an OKR and a KPI? So typically an OKR is a set of challenging objectives that supports the strategy, challenges the status quo where you're going. Usually they've got a growth orientated mindset and challenges organizations to improve. So as an organization, if you're not happy with the status quo, if you want to improve, having some sort of challenging objectives and key results will help you get where you want to be. KPIs, although they can also be challenging, typically don't change as often and are usually ongoing metrics to give you a bit of an indicator of where you're going. OKRs are typically qualitative, and the key result areas is the quantitative piece. The KPIs are typically a bunch of really quantitative measures to give you some sort of metric or output of where you're going. So a good example would be an objective could be for an organisation to improve warehouse critical control. So that's what you want to achieve. How that's measured and tracked through your key result areas could be 100% of forklifts fitted with sensors over a certain period of time, or how effective the critical controls are by way of a percentage also across a period of time. So we'll talk through how to set up really effective OKRs and KPIs at the moment. But to set the scene, the OKR is really those objectives and key results associated with the strategic choices that you're making, and the KPIs are the indicators of how you're tracking. So we've got here a question from Sharon. So why do so many companies focus on LTI reporting? There is almost an obsession and manipulation of small details to refute LTIs occurred. So yeah, look, sad but true, Sharon. Look, I think in the absence of having a consistent metric, and we'll work through different components of and elements of what makes a good KPI. I think organisations and industry have typically used LTI or TRIFR because it's easy to understand and it's easy to compare. Why are people so obsessed? When you set targets and sometimes remuneration around these sorts of things, or if you're setting targets that are the difference between winning and losing a contract that drives certain behaviour. I'm sure there's lots of other reasons. So I guess as an organisation, as an industry, there's lots and lots of, I guess, noise around at the moment around what makes an effective measure. I guess today I'm sort of sharing with you an approach on a balanced scorecard, not one measure, but a balanced scorecard on a different approach on focusing less on the KPI and a little bit more on your OKRs and the strategy and how your strategic objectives are being tracked and measured. If we just park safety for a second and we think about a business analyst or some sort of analyst or a venture capitalist company trying to evaluate whether they want to purchase a company or invest in a company, typically there's not one metric that they look at. It's usually a combination of your typical balance sheet, your P&L, your cash flow, and a bunch of other metrics and ratios to give the analyst a bit of an understanding of the performance of an organisation. If we take that same approach with safety, usually there's not one indicator that's going to give you a complete picture. So informing your boards, your senior managers and other people in your organisation around the right mixture of metrics and building the capability of them to understand those metrics will help them make the right strategic choices and decisions. So what makes a good OKR? So as I mentioned before, it is really important to ensure that your OKRs are challenging the status quo to drive improvement if that's the intent of your strategy. The term OKR is not new. It's not something that we've made up. The likes of Google, Intel, LinkedIn, and many more organizations use the OKR model to drive strategic choices, strategic development and deployment to improve their organizations. Typically, an OKR is, and the key result measure around that is usually somewhere between 30 and 90 days, with the view that as part of your deployment, there's regular check-ins to understand how your strategy is being deployed. So if we reflect on the poll at the beginning of the webinar today, we've only got 10% of people on the call today checking in with their operations to understand how their strategy is being performed. So that is relatively low. I think we had about 250 people join. So 10%, and although not the full 250 people are on the call today, 10% is a pretty low number. And I guess the challenge for people listening today is, apart from understanding whether or not your strategy is correct and the way you're measuring that's correct, is the frequency of engaging different parts of your organization done on a regular basis and on a basis that's frequent enough to support your strategy. So apart from those OKRs being bold, it's also really important to ensure that they're objective and also inspiring and meaningful to the organization so they understand and it drives the improvements that you're trying to look for. The key results, so they're the measurement piece that supports the objective, should be specific, measurable, aggressive, realistic, time-bound, and more importantly, verifiable. So as you start thinking around how you're deploying your strategy effectively and the frequency of review, you want to be able to verify whether or not it's working. So having a key result area that's verifiable not only checks in to ensure that it's effective, but it also ensures the right level of accountability to ensure that people are doing what they've intended to do in the first place. And lastly, the OKR should be aligned and cascaded through the organisation, but from an organisational level, through business units, teams, and ideally at an individual level as well. By having that alignment and cascade, it gives purpose, it motivates, ensures alignment, and encourages the organisation, everyone within it, to work towards those common goals and objectives that you set. We've got another Q&A here, so I'll just quickly see if it's something relevant to share. Matthew has put up a post here. As discussed in the last few weeks, AISH forums panel is seen by industry that it is evidence-based. Not quite sure what that is, but it sounds like there's some work being done at the moment within industry to come up with some metrics that's going to be meaningful and help the organisation and industry. So yeah, Matthew, if you want to provide a bit more detail on where people can find more information on any leading practices around what good KPIs are or metrics are to measure performance, it'd be great for you to share that or where to get additional information. So this is, as we start working through the OKR KPI approach, this is the OKR piece of the puzzle, and we'll talk a little bit more around KPIs in a second. But in terms of what this might look like, one of the more challenging components of having effective OKRs is the alignment and the cascading. So we'll go through an example of a second of what that might look like. So this is just one way. There's lots of different ways you can cascade objectives and key result areas, but typically an organisation or a leader will set the objectives that will be reviewed periodically, but they generally don't change. The leader sets the direction, and those objectives are adopted by the organisation, and some key results put around those to track performance. So if Sarah's the leader of the organisation, sets the tone, and then cascades those down. So that the key result areas that Sarah sets then becomes the objectives of Bill's area, her report, and they cascade down accordingly. That enabled Bill and anyone at his same level to make his key result areas specific to his area of the business. So it allows cascading, but also provides relevance to different parts of the organisation. So if we just go through an example of what that might look like, if Sarah's setting the objective similar to what the example was before around improving forklift safety, in the key result area, one of the key result areas is to ensure 100% of forklifts are fixed with sensors. That key result can then be adopted where relevant as an objective for Bill, and then he comes up with the respective key result areas for his business. So there typically is 3 or 4 key results for each objective. So this is just an example of one. So if Bill adopts that key result as his objective, he then comes up with some key result areas. So a key result for his area could be to trial and evaluate those sensors within a respective time period as well. And then he assigns ownership within his business to make that happen. So if you're reviewing this on a quarterly basis, you can ensure that they're not only working and ensure that there's different mechanisms to track performance and drive improvement. So again, getting the balance right, if you're focused on the OKRs and getting the OKRs right, the KPIs should take care of themselves. So cascading those OKRs down from an organisation, team and individual level should share that, ensure that alignment. In terms of then tracking that performance, one approach is to rate your OKR performance from 0 through to 1. So 0 or 0.1 being the lower end of actually meeting your key result area, through to 1 being 100%, knocked it out of the park. What we said we're going to do, we've achieved, and we can move on to tweaking that to make further improvements. So you can see here a really simple dashboard where you're tracking your OKRs to ensure that the strategy is working and is on track. I'm working with an organisation at the moment who didn't want to get too caught up in the numbers. They seem to think that within their organisation, culturally, they didn't want to focus too much on numbers because it was driving behaviour that they didn't want. So we've just used a simple traffic light system of red, orange or green of how their OKRs are performing. Still provides the same outcome in terms of tracking OKRs on a regular basis, and provides an opportunity to stop, reflect and check in on strategy and performance on a regular basis. So that's the OKR side of the equation. Now, if we focus on KPIs a little bit, although my personal bias is to focus more on OKRs than KPIs, KPIs are important and they do provide a good indicator of performance. Now, whether you're trying to track performance internally and compare performance within organisations and or compare externally, that'll help you formulate the right KPIs that are right for your organisation. Using this model, KPI should be balanced between being both evidence-based and opinion-based. So if we look at some examples of what evidence-based looks like, so KPIs that are predictive, okay, so they accurately forecast the future. They're valid, so statistically they measure what they're intended to do, and reliable. So statistically reliable in that it provides a repeatable, consistent result. So an example of that is a survey tool. Spoke a little bit about the health and safety index in other webinars. To make a declaration, we've developed the health and safety index ourselves. So we've got a bit of a bias to using that with organisations. Regardless of what survey tool you choose to use or what KPIs you choose to use that are evidence-based, what I would recommend is to ask the person who has designed the tool around what is the statistical reliability of the survey. So you've got high levels of credibility and the confidence intervals are right, that when you redo the survey or you're comparing surveys on a benchmark basis, that it's statistically reliable and meaningful. So that's the evidence-based side of the equation around a KPI. So in terms of opinion-based, ensure that the KPIs are important and directly reflect the outcomes of what matters. So if we take lost time injury as a frequency, as an example of is it important. So, you know, sometimes the difference between someone falling off a ladder and having a scrape on their knee and falling off a ladder and having a lost time injury or worst case fatality is luck. So that's just one example of why sometimes lost time injuries is perceived as not necessarily really reflecting on what matters. Is it functional? So is the KPI aligned with what the organisation is trying to achieve? Is it aligned with the strategy? And is it clear and understood? So if you've got a right understanding and mixture and balanced set of KPIs that cover off some of these areas, you know, inevitably you're going to come up with a good mixture of things to inform some sort of decision making. So I've just got another Q&A in here from Declan. Doesn't a fundamental feature of compliance around ISO require companies to develop key objectives, communicate those through continuous improvement? Yep, certainly does. So I guess part of what we're doing today is just giving people, I guess, some guidance on how to develop and deploy objectives in a meaningful way using the OKR KPI model. We've got some other Q&As here as well. Something from Stephen. I fail to understand how TRIFA can either prove or provide evidence of safety culture. Yep, I think it's a fair comment. And something from Paul. It doesn't. Safe Work Australia has a very interesting paper on LTIs. So look, I think there's an overwhelming consensus here around and frustration from some people around the use of lag indicators and whether or not they're meaningful or not. So I guess what we're talking through today is just other ways that you can measure performance without necessarily being too reliant on some of these lag indicators and injury frequency rates. So if we take the elements of a good KPI that we just spoke about and now give some examples of what that might look like across those various elements. If we take TRIFA, one of the reasons why historically it's been used so I guess widespread across industries that it's objective and it's clear. Doesn't necessarily make it valid, doesn't make it predictive, doesn't necessarily make it functional, as people have already alluded to, but that's one reason why people use it. So it's not to say you shouldn't use it at all, but you just need to understand when to use it based on the mixture of performance metrics you've got, and when to use it based on your level of maturity. So, for example, if you're an organisation that's very mature and you've got one recordable injury a year that blows out your stats, that's not going to be valid at all. So using injury frequency rates isn't going to be that beneficial to you. As organisations move through the maturity and become more mature and perform better, and they're becoming having less injuries, the validity of injury frequency rate becomes less and less. So for the challenge for organisations and industry, hopefully as we improve, the relevance of TRIFA and injury frequency rate should become less and less. So we need to move towards something that's going to provide a bit of a balance on what good performance is. So if we look at another example around measuring and reporting on potential consequence, so this could be some sort of event where, regardless of the injury classification, you're reporting on the potential for something to go wrong. Often that's very valid and really important. May not necessarily be as objective and clear all the time around near miss on whether or not it's a potential catastrophic or a potential major. But notwithstanding that, if someone's up a ladder without the right fall protection, or working at height without the right fall protection, clearly, regardless of the injury classification, the potential for consequence is quite high, and you want to be able to drive the right behaviour and performance. As we start talking around performance, it's also worth noting too, although behaviour is such an important component of performance, when you come up with the right OKR KPI mix, it's important to understand that performance is behaviour and people. It's also around plant and assets. It's performance around process and systems, performance around environment, etc. So getting the right mix of what you're measuring based on your strategy is going to be really, really important. Okay, so another example here, moving through another metric that organisations might use as part of their balanced scorecard are valid surveys. So statistically reliable and valid surveys that help measure performance and predict potentially where things are headed. So typically organisations use some sort of health and safety climate survey. We spoke about the health and safety index before. Some of the benefits of a climate survey that's designed in the right way is that it's valid, it can be predictive, it's certainly important. The level of objectivity can be questionable based on the type of question. It's usually based on perception. But if you've got the right population size and the right confidence intervals, inevitably that perception is going to tell you a story of what's working, where to focus on what's not quite right or things that could be improved. And sometimes, depending on how that information is visually displayed, and depending on how much it costs and how hard it is deployed, can vary from organisation to organisation. So, trying to pick the right survey and the right population size, if done correctly, can actually provide really good indicator of how things are performing with your organisation. So lastly, another KPI example would be some lead indicators. So usually a good balance between qualitative and quantitative lead indicators, be it focusing on critical controls and how effective they are as a lead indicator, or some sort of enabling control, again, can be just another mixture in your balanced scorecard to provide an overarching story of how things are going and some things that people can take and learn from. So I guess the overarching message here is if you can provide the right mixture of KPIs, they should be able to cover off those 6 elements of what a good KPI looks like and tell an effective story. So the chat's going off, so just let me pause for a second. I'll see if I can answer some of these. So we've got something here from Sharon. So g'day Sharon, good to see you on board. I know that you've got some really strong and valid views around LTIs. Injury measures don't measure culture, correct. They do provide an indicator of harm, which is also of interest to governments and businesses. So we need to match the measure to the question of what they actually want answered. And yes, we do need a better indicator. So thanks, Sharon. Hope you're well. We've also got another question here or a response from Christian. Listening to the recent commentary from many platforms, there is a general acknowledgement that TRIFR has its place and should be one metric, but it should not be associated with the presence of safety or safety culture. Yep, fair call. Lots of commentary around the absence of failure and the presence of enabling things that are going well. And the absence of failure isn't necessarily a good measure of performance. So yeah, definitely in line with what we're talking about today. TRIFR is a valid indicator of injury occurrence, not a culture of safety systems. Okay, thanks, Sharon. The research out of Canada sort of challenges some of that thinking a little bit, but I can understand for some organisations where TRIFR can be valid. We've got some other people agreeing here, and we've got Sarah sharing a link from SafeWork with some of that guidance material as well. So look, lots of good chats here. I can see that there's lots of interest around this subject area. So hopefully as we go through, we're providing a bit of a balanced view on what organisations can think about and what's right for them. I'll just double check the time to make sure we're okay. So we've got about another 20 minutes left, so tracking okay. So if we just take those examples a little bit further and provide some case studies. So if we look at the potential consequence, look, for many organisations and people on the call, this probably isn't new, but just to clarify here that when we're talking around potential consequence, it's not pure risk. We're talking around the consequence side of the equation of a typical matrix. And some organisations start to tier the potential consequence ratings and report on those based on a tier 1, tier 2 model, based on the level of consequence. And obviously that can then tie into different topics or major hazards or major unwanted events based on any sort of categories you have for reporting, and start to tell a story of where to focus your attention. Some examples of lead indicators, so enabling controls, that could be some metrics around timely action closure. It could be around effective responses. It could be adopting of shared learning. I was listening to someone yesterday talk around innovation and how they've embedded innovation into their strategy, OKRs, and even some of their KPIs to promote and reward people on innovation to drive improvement. So moving beyond enabling controls to critical controls. I know there's been a lot of talk and lots of resources on the MICE website around this. So using critical controls and measuring critical controls through sensors on plant and equipment. So often that can be automated. It could be driven through your system requirements, offsite observations, and other human sensors to really get some metrics and set some, targets in and around what good looks like for your organisation. And then health and safety climate, again, using reliable safety climate surveys, or within the health and safety index, a broader view on health and safety. You can get a pretty good indicator of how things are performing within your organisation. So another chat on the call here, Jeremy. This is a great document, well worth a read. So that's the document I think that Sarah sent through. So great. And Paul's also said need to measure the presence and effectiveness of controls, and also learn from what is going right. So look, 100% agree on that one, Paul. So it sort of ties in with this whole concept there of measuring the effectiveness of critical controls and sharing that learning in around how effective controls are within your organisation. Okay, so we've spoken a lot about what a good OKR looks like, what a good KPI looks like, some potential examples. So in terms of then, executing that well within your organisation, one thing to consider is the maturity of your business. So if you're just starting out, or you're a basic compliance for whatever reason, which is absolutely fine, the metrics that you use versus a more mature organisation could be very different based on your resources and just the general level of capability and maturity of the business teams and individuals within your company. So you can see there, not surprisingly, we've got injury frequency rates as a measure, albeit quite reactive and typically used for lower mature organisations. Moving up the maturity scale, still on a reactive sense, we've got potential consequence ratings. So again, a really good measure to look at potential consequence, focusing on those major events, and usually more mature organisations will focus on that more so than waiting for an injury to occur. On the other side of the equation, looking at the proactive side, which ideally where people want to play, moving from enabling controls through to critical controls, or moving from quantity-based counts, so the number of hazards, the number of toolbox talks, the number of licenses expired, which are very compliance-driven, through to what are the quality of those controls, and how effective is certain intervention. And then moving through to mature organisations in a proactive sense, using OKR ratings, so really tracking your strategy, so not getting too tied into your KPIs, and using the OKR model or something similar to actually track your strategy on a regular basis. So you're clear on your destination, you know where you're going, and you're heading in the right direction to what's important to your organisation. And again, reaffirming what some of the chat said around the importance of critical controls, and then using reliable benchmark, either survey data or other indicators, to give you a sense of how you're performing both internally and externally within your organisation. So these are just some examples, and just something for people to think about in terms of not trying to do it all, but select some OKRs and KPIs that's going to suit your organisation and the level of maturity. So we've got another chat from Steve. Thanks for sharing. Steve's got a link here to a website on a guideline for performance indicators. So thanks for sharing. Sort of drawing to the back end of the presentation here. So we'll have an opportunity to ask more question and answers. So I guess in summary, what we've spoken about today is getting the right balance between OKRs and KPIs. So being clear on what you want to achieve, where you want to play, and using KPIs as an indicator of making sure that you're heading in the right direction, and ensuring that you're selecting the right metrics to measure what matters to your organisation based on the level of maturity and the strategy of what you think's important. So Sarah, we're sort of opening things up for a Q&A in a second. For people who do want more information, we do have a blog on this subject area, and you can download a template, an OKR template, to help formulate what you think is good for your organisation. We've also got a blog, which I think is referring back to a lot of the work that we did with Miles recently on critical controls. And also we've got some information on the health and safety index there too, if people want that. Some external information, the International Association of Oil and Gas has got some really cool information on rating potential consequence as a way to tier KPIs based on both lag and lead indicators. So again, just some other material there that people might want to go and have a look at that's important in addition to what people have shared already today. So really that's it for today. I'm just having a look at the numbers here. We've got 101 people still on the call. So, we've got another 5 or 10 minutes. I'm happy to hang around a lot longer if people want to start firing questions, share information. This isn't all about me trying to answer and come up with all the silver bullets, because I don't have them. But if people want to share information or fire some questions or learning, could be a great opportunity given we've got so many people on the call today. We've got something here from Jessica. One of the challenges and limits that we face with KPIs is how we collect them. 100%. So the administrative burden on what KPIs you select is dead right. I mean, I've been in organisations where they've set targets around hazard reporting and drives a whole heap of admin and doesn't necessarily add a whole lot of value, depending on the level of maturity. We've got something here from Stephen saying thank you. No dramas there. Thanks, Stephen. happy to take some more chats as they come through as well. Jessica's also saying the systems I have used to design give us quantitative data, but not so great on qualitative. It becomes onerous and unachievable. So, yep, having the right mixture there of quantitative and qualitative's often good. If you are using the OKR model to track your performance, you can put a number next to it, or you can just have a learning team to sit there and have a chat around what's working, what's not, without necessarily putting a number next to it at all. Something from Wayne. Wayne says, thanks, Wayne. Sarah, is there any more information that you think's worth sharing on the chat that people might find relevant today?
Well, I do actually. I've got a little academy that I'd like to launch. We've done over, I think, well over 100 webinars in the last couple of years. So we wanted to put them in one place where everyone can just search for a keyword or a certain topic. If you scroll to the bottom of that website, you'll see a directory sort of all the people who have presented, including FEFO. And if you click on the FEFO link, which I'll try and get just now, you will see all the webinars that FEFO and Mark's colleagues that they've done. So there's an email address at the top if you have any feedback, or you know someone that you want to present, or you want to recommend a topic, then we will get to that. I'll get hold of that and get your feedback. So hopefully it's a platform that people can use to learn from, and there's different ways. There's a podcast, so you can listen in the car or on the train, and just looking forward to feedback on that. So there's that FEFO site. So all Mark's webinars are there, and if there's any other resources too, any other YouTube videos or white papers that you think of, please email them and we'll try and get them up there too. There is another question. Chris says, how do we subscribe to the newsletters? There's a subscription at the top right on that website, but if you subscribe to MyOsh webinars, you'll also get all the content. We're basically shifting the webinar content to this platform, so that and so also sort of taking it global as well, to get presenters and expertise from other regions as well. There's a question here, I think, Mark, from Sharon, says induction and training KPIs rather than OKR, question mark.
Yeah, so look, you could formulate both an OKR and a KPI around both those subject areas. So, I mean, a KPI could be just tracking, the completion rates, whereas you could develop some OKRs, some strategic initiatives around improving the content delivery and outcomes of those inductions as well. There's also another question here, Sarah, from Christian. With the clients you work with, are you seeing any general industry themes for OKRs direction? Perhaps a question for another time. Yeah, look, it probably is something that we could talk about a lot. What I am seeing, some general trends around what people are focusing on around OKRs. So, some of those strategic choices around where to focus is on critical controls. So trying to formulate on what the critical few are, shifting from enabling through to really understanding what their critical controls are and how effective they are. Health and wellbeing is an ongoing popular topic. Leadership and culture certainly are a good one too. In terms of people thinking that's important for their organisation, but some of those things that come up in a lot of the webinars that MyOsh are doing are probably a good representation of where people are starting to focus on. So in terms of high frequency injuries and getting the balance between high consequence, high frequency, a lot of musculoskeletal style initiatives, OKRs, and even new technology out there to track that as well. Sarah, I understand you've got a webinar coming up on trying to measure musculoskeletal injuries in the coming weeks as well, which will be interesting.
Yeah, that's on the 7th of July. We haven't published it yet, but it'll be on that webinar, that academy, in the next couple of days.
Alrighty, look, that's it for me, Sarah. Looks like a lot of the Q&As are starting to dry up. So there was a question around, will the slides be made available? So yeah, definitely I'll send those through to you, Sarah, and feel free to share those. If people want a copy of the OKR template, either jump on our website or shoot me an email, I can send that through as well.
Great, okay, thanks Mark. Thank you very much for that. Looks like everyone appreciated it very much, and hopefully see everyone next week as well. Okay.
Okay, thanks
everyone. Bye.
Alrighty. Now finished, Sarah?
Yeah. Just reading the chat actually, so I didn't want to cut it off. All right, yes, thanks Mark. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, I was looking at the numbers. I think we hit just over 100, and it stayed 100 almost the whole way, which is pretty cool.
It's a very strange thing, that 40%.
The magic number.
It is. I should have a lotto or a bet on it. All right, thanks everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.